Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Jones, and I welcome you to another live story coming to you from Lifestories worldwide. We are live on StreamYard, Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. And you can also watch directly on our website, lifestoriesworldwide.com. We bring you stories from across the world, and these stories go out also across the world. We bring you stories of people who've gone through all types of struggles, challenges, and how their lives have been transformed. We have a story today coming to you from Australia. I will introduce the speaker in a moment, but I just wanted to encourage you to go to our website, lifestoriesworldwide.com. You'll find lots of interesting information there. I also encourage you to go to our YouTube, Life Stories Worldwide, and there to sign up and become a subscriber and share with others these stories, which are wonderful stories. And on there, you can watch stories that have been on previous Mondays. Today, we, as I say, have a guest from Australia, Dr. Stuart Robinson. Stuart was originally born in Brisbane, but then he's now in Melbourne. When he was competing and training to represent Australia in the Olympic Games, the Lord spoke to him and told him to get his brain from his feet to his head. And it was then that God called him into a missionary work, and he's been working in Asia for many years. It's a great privilege now to introduce Dr. Stuart Robinson. Welcome, Stuart.
Hi there. Good to be with you today. Well, I hope as you see me, you'll think of me as really quite a young man. But as you'll learn, that's not quite so. You see, I was born quite a long time ago, actually, compared with most of you who are watching this. When I was born, can you imagine a world like this, that there was no television, no penicillin, no antibiotics, no vitamin pills, no nylon, no plastic, no radar, no fluorescent tube lighting, no credit cards, no ballpoint pens, no dishwashers or washing machines or clothes dryers, not even any refrigerators or freezers, no electric blankets, no instant coffee, in fact, no instant anything, no tape recorders, no copying machines. Oh, and there wasn't even a single McDonald's restaurant. Coke. In those days, we knew of that as a refreshing drink. These days, Coke is something else. Pot. Well, that was something that we cooked our food in. Grass. Well, that was for mowing. And letters such as CIA, NATO, UFO, NFL, JFK, IVF, DDT, and so on. These were all letters that we found when we had our alphabet soup. And it was a time when males married females, and it was only after they married that they started to live together. That's quite a while ago, before all of those things have happened in my lifetime. In my childhood, I never wore shoes. I had only secondhand clothing or hand-me-down clothing from others, from relatives or friends to wear. I was always out looking for food because we were a very poor family. The home in which we lived, it had just 2 rooms. And we had no running water, no taps or anything like that, no electricity, no toilet or bathroom. And when it rained, I remember we had to sleep under the kitchen table so that the water wouldn't be dripping in on top of us. For the first 5 years of my life, I saw my father twice because he was in the Air Force. This was during World War II. And when he returned from the war, he was often away searching for work anywhere that could be found. So I grew up, in a sense, without a father. In addition to the usual consequences of poverty, there was violence. My father was a somewhat angry man. I think what we know now, of course, he has died long ago, but probably he was suffering from what we call today PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Lots of people who lived in the war had that problem, but we didn't realize what it was. And these days, of course, it's understood and counseling is available. But that violence and anger, which was a part of his life, very much affected our home. And if that wasn't enough, yes, I was submitted to sexual abuse as well by a close relative. That's usually the way these things happen. So today, of course, had the home that I grew up in, had it been here today, I dare say the government would have removed me and my three brothers from that home. But we didn't have those welfare supports back then. My father divorced my mother, and he went on to marry two more times, and neither of those were successful. And he was on his fourth relationship when he died. As Alan mentioned earlier, I grew up in the city of Brisbane, or shall I say near the city of Brisbane. We lived in a swamp area where poor people lived. And in that area, when we were children, everybody left school by the age of 14. That was the earliest age at which the government would allow us to leave school. And so everyone did that, and they went to work in local factories because money was so scarce, and the factories would employ children such as we were. And that gave us a job until we were 21 years of age. And as soon as we turned 21, those factories would sack everybody because they didn't want to pay adult wages. And of course, that started then a long life stream of unemployment. During my teenage years, I played lots of football. By football, I mean not that gridiron they have over in the United States, not even soccer, which is so popular now. Rugby union, Australia has just lost badly in the World Championships. We won't talk about that. It was rugby league, which is the poor man's rugby union. And I was a captain of the team and played intercity football. But more than that, I wanted to be an athlete. And so morning and night for 6 years, I was training to represent Australia at the Olympic Games. That was my ideal. And of course, the other thing I remember from my youth.
Life Stories Worldwide is on YouTube, and it's very easy to subscribe to our channel. Just click the bell and subscribe, and receive notifications of when we are live, or simply watch any of our other videos. So check it out and give us a visit.
Youth was the matter of girls. Oh yes, plenty of girls. And of course, if you're an athlete and a footballer, it's easy to attract lots of lovely girls. Regarding God and Jesus Christ, I knew of those words. They were words that we used as expletives, as swear words. If I was using a hammer and hit my thumb out of anger or hurt or pain, yes, I'd shout those words, but I didn't know hardly anything else about what those words meant. They were just words in our vocabulary. Much later in life, I did some research and I found that there were no Christians, no trace of any Christians in my family for 5 generations. That's as far back as I could go. And even then, there may not have been any beyond then, if ever at all. Whenever we buy a motor car, new and even secondhand, usually there with the motor car, there comes what's called a manufacturer's manual. And it gives, these days, of course, that's provided digitally. But but you can download it, and there's your manufacturer's manual, and it tells you all about the vehicle you've got, the car you've got. And if you're going to get the best miles out of that car, the best kilometers, running time, you need to follow what the book says. Well, of course, if you're the owner, you don't have to follow the book. You can do what you like. I mean, after all, it is your car. And if you want to save money, well, you don't have to put petrol or gas in the tank. You can put water. If you want to make it run more sweetly, put a bit of sugar in the oil. And as for the tires, well, we don't have time to go to the garage and check the tire pressure. Let them run flat. We can do those sorts of things because we're the owner. But if you want to get good mileage out of your vehicle, you better make sure and follow the instructions of the company that manufactured it. And I came to learn it's exactly the same in life, that it is said that God created life. And as the manufacturer, he provided for us a manufacturer's manual. And if we want to get the best mileage out of life, we need to follow that manufacturer's manual. The manual, by the way, is called the Bible. And as a young man, of course, with my background, we didn't know anything much about this Bible. My introduction to it came as a young man. A friend invited me to go with him to the cinema on a Sunday night. Oh, I was happy to do that because this was in an age when on Sunday, nothing else was operating except the streetlights, if I hadn't already smashed them, as I used to do, much to my shame now. But he invited me to the cinema, and I thought, yes, I'll go and see a movie. I like watching movies. It was cheap, and of course, we would try to sneak into the cinema without paying the ticket price, and that meant it was cheap, and therefore I was able to enjoy movies. It was the only form of entertainment available. But I was hugely disappointed when I got into the place and found there was no movie. There was this guy up on the platform, on the stage, standing in front of the screen where the movie should have been shown. And I thought he's going to get out of the way soon, but he never did. He just kept talking. And he was talking about a person called Jesus. And he said this Jesus came into the world a long time ago. He did many amazing things, healing people, and he was a great, great person. But the strange thing was, even though he'd committed no crime, he had no wrongs, he allowed himself to be falsely accused and was killed on a cross. And up to this point, I guess, if you know a little bit of my life story, such as I've shared, you probably agree that my start in life was hardly ideal. In fact, before that night at the cinema, I guess I was like many of the people that in our place where we lived, I was heading toward a life of significant unemployment, perhaps involvement with gangs and those sorts of things. I did think, well, if I can't get a job in another factory, maybe I could become a train driver. Of course, the trains are all steam trains. If I'd done that, I would certainly be out of a job by now because there are no more steam trains. Then I thought, well, maybe I could become a soldier. That'd be good. Yeah, I'd probably end up by this time dead in Vietnam or somewhere else where Australian servicemen have served over the years. But my life actually has turned out quite differently because of that night in the cinema. From the little bit I can share with you about my life now, I've got titles, various titles, professional and academic titles before my name. And after my name, I've got lots of letters with sundry university degrees, which I've earned. And I've been used of God, working overseas, and particularly in Asia. And there I was working amongst a people who are very, very hostile toward Christianity. And I was enabled by the power of God to develop completely new ways of working, new principles which no one had tried before. Amongst these people for hundreds of years, nobody had ever accepted the Christian message as far as we knew. But the principles that God showed us, yeah, they were revolutionary, all right, but they have since been adopted in many other countries and changed, of course, according to environment, and has now proved to be so successful. And then after 14 years of doing that sort of work, I was called back to my nation here in Australia. And I was asked to become the pastor of a church here. I'd never thought of becoming a pastor. They were those queer guys that have back to front dog collars and wear all sorts of flowing robes, and that never appealed to me. But God called me back, and I accepted the challenge of becoming a pastor, and he used me to start a totally different sort of church. And that church has become one of the largest in the nation here. It has sent out hundreds of missionaries. It has started many other congregations. And when it grew to 5,000 people attending on weekends, and another 10,000 called it home, and after God had used me to raise tens of millions of dollars to buy 16 acres of land. And
Lifestories Worldwide is broadcast live every Monday night at 8 p.m. UK time. We broadcast on YouTube, Facebook and StreamYard. Why not join us every Monday night at 8 p.m. UK time for Lifestories Worldwide.
Build lots of buildings, and there was no debt remaining. I knew it was time then to hand over responsibility for this church to the next generation. And all of this was happening at a time when here in Australia, church has been continuously dying. And in Melbourne, we were closing churches every month. And yet this church has grown and grown and grown. I've just published my 13th book. It's called Prayer Power. And these days, 3 times a year, I circle the globe, speaking and preaching and teaching and mentoring, coaching others in all sorts of interesting countries that I have the privilege of getting to. I'm in the gym 5 days a week by 6 a.m. I don't take medication, well, hardly any medication. And would you believe it? I said at the beginning, you might think I'm only 40. I'm not that old. Actually, I'm 82 and 82 years young. I've been married now for 56 years. 2 of my children have their PhDs, and the third one works in palliative care in a medical field, supervising about 250 workers in that field. And as I look back on my life now, the critical thing was what happened in that cinema on that Sunday night. I was there with other friends, of course, and most of the friends of my youth, they never discovered what I discovered. And they have led what I'd call rather average lives compared with the life I've lived. And of course, some of them ended tragically. With such a miserable start to life, how could it be possible that I would become what many people in the world would say is quite successful? Well, as I said before, it all relates to that preacher in that cinema on that Sunday night when I attended as a young man. You see, he talked about Jesus and how he died on a cross. And he told us why Jesus allowed himself to be killed on a cross. And the reason he told us was that all of us had knowingly or unknowingly broken God's laws. I hadn't thought much about that. I didn't know anything much about God, let alone understand what his laws were. But he said, this is what the Bible teaches, that we have all broken God's laws. And of course, whenever you break a law, then there are penalties involved. If you break the traffic law or you break whatever the law of the government is, there's going to be penalties. And he went on to say how at the beginning of time, God offered our forebears, the first man, the first woman, the enormous privilege of an intimate relationship with God himself. But there was one condition, just one condition attached to maintaining this very valuable relationship. That original man and woman, whom the Bible calls Adam and Eve, they could enjoy a magnificent life in a beautiful garden that God had made for them. But he just had one condition, namely, there was a special tree there, and God said to these people, you must not eat of the fruit of that tree. And he warned them, if you eat of the fruit of that tree, you die physically and spiritually. So to enjoy an intimate relationship with God, there was that one condition of continued obedience. But then along came another entity called Satan, and he had a seductive counter offer. He offered power based upon knowledge. Oh, we human beings, we do love power. And he's virtually saying, well, who cares about what God says? You don't have to worry about that. Why don't you try some of that delicious fruit and you will become like God himself. You'll have such knowledge. Well, whenever we break God's law, in fact, what happens is the law breaks us. And lawbreakers become known as sinners. That's what the Bible calls them. And we have lived ever since with the terrible consequences of our disobedience, of our law breaking. But the good news, as that man told us on that night, is that even though we had broken God's law, he still loved us. And even though we turned away from him and didn't care about him, lived lives just as we pleased as our creator, he still loved us. And so he created a rescue plan for all of his lost humanity. Well, the law was broken. Jesus demanded that a penalty be paid. Or rather, God demanded that a penalty be paid. And that penalty was physical and spiritual death. And the only way that we could avoid coming under the threat of that penalty, of that judgment, was if someone else would step up and take the punishment which was due to me on my behalf. But who would be willing to step in and give their life so that you and I, so that all of humanity could go free? And that's where Jesus came in. Jesus, of course, was innocent. He'd never committed any sin. He'd been sent by God. But he was willing to take my place, to die instead of me. He was offering his life as a ransom so that I could go free. As I speak to you today, there are negotiations going on in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas. The Israelis want the 240 people who were kidnapped by Hamas, who are now held hostage by Hamas. Israel wants them back. As it stands at the moment, unless they can be freed, they will certainly be tortured and killed.